In 2019, the Supreme Court of India made a landmark ruling in the Ayodhya temple controversy, handing over the disputed site to a trust to build a Hindu temple. But what led to this decision, and what does it mean for the future of India? Join us as we unpack the complex history and politics of this highly charged dispute. Welcome to this video on the Ayodhya temple controversy, one of the most significant and contentious issues in India's social, cultural and political landscape. The dispute revolves around a piece of land in Ayodhya, Uttar Pradesh, which is claimed by both Hindus and Muslims for different reasons. In this video, we will take a deep dive into the historical background of the controversy, discuss the various legal battles that have taken place over the years, and explore the implications of the issue for India's social fabric. The Ayodhya temple controversy has a long and complex history that dates back several centuries. According to Hindu tradition, the land in Ayodhya is the birthplace of Lord Rama, one of the most revered deities in Hinduism. Hindus claim that a temple dedicated to Lord Rama once stood on the site, but was destroyed by the Mughal ruler Babur in the 16th century, who built a mosque called the Babri Masjid in its place. Muslims, on the other hand, claim that the Babri Masjid was built on the site by Babur's commander, Mir Baqi, in 1528. They argue that the mosque was a place of worship for Muslims for several centuries and that they have a rightful claim to the land. The dispute over the site first gained national attention in the 1980s, when the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, VHP, and other Hindu groups launched a campaign to reclaim the land for the construction of a temple dedicated to Lord Rama. This led to several violent incidents, including the Babri Masjid demolition in 1992, which resulted in widespread communal violence across India. The legal battle over the Ayodhya site began in 1949 when a group of Hindu activists placed idols of Lord Ram in the mosque. The dispute led to a number of lawsuits being filed by both Hindus and Muslims over the ownership of the land. In 1961, the Uttar Pradesh Sunni Waqf board filed a case claiming ownership of the mosque. In 1984, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, VHP, launched a movement to build a temple at the site, which was followed by a number of violent clashes between the two communities. In 1986, the Allahabad High Court ordered the gates of the mosque to be opened, allowing Hindus to worship at the site. The order also stated that a partition be constructed to separate the areas used by the two communities. The decision was appealed to the Supreme Court, which upheld the High Court's decision to allow Hindus to worship at the site, but struck down the order to partition the area. The legal battle reached its peak in 2010 when the Allahabad High Court issued a verdict in the case. The court divided the land into three parts, 1/3 for the Sunni Waqf board, 1/3 for the Nirmohi Akhara and 1/3 for the Hindu Mahasabha. The decision was again challenged in the Supreme Court, which put a stay on the High Court's order. In 2019, the Supreme Court finally delivered its verdict on the Ayodhya dispute. The court ruled that the disputed land belonged to the Hindus and ordered the government to set up a trust to oversee the construction of a temple at the site. The court also directed the government to allot an alternate 5-acre plot of land to the Sunni Waqf board for the construction of a mosque. The evidence presented by both sides in the legal battle over the Ayodhya site included historical and archaeological findings, as well as religious beliefs and traditions. The Hindu side presented evidence that Lord Ram was born at the site and that a temple dedicated to him had existed there since ancient times. They cited the accounts of medieval travelers, such as Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta, who had visited the area and mentioned the presence of a temple at the site. They also presented archaeological evidence, including the discovery of a temple foundation and a statue of Lord Vishnu at the site. The Muslim side argued that the Babri Masjid had been built at the site in 1528 by the Mughal Emperor Babur. They cited the presence of inscriptions on the mosque walls and the accounts of travelers who had visited the area during the Mughal period. They also argued that the Hindus had not been able to prove the existence of a temple at the site before the construction of the mosque. The legal battle over the Ayodhya site was not just about the ownership of a piece of land, but also about the religious sentiments and beliefs of millions of Hindus and Muslims. The verdict of the Supreme Court in 2019 was hailed by many as a historic moment that brought closure to a long-standing dispute. However, the decision has also been criticized by some who argue that it has set a dangerous precedent by legitimizing the destruction of a religious site and rewarding those who committed the act of vandalism. Several legal evidences were presented in court for the Ayodhya temple controversy. Some of the most significant pieces of evidence include archaeological findings. The Archaeological Survey of India conducted excavations at the disputed site in 2003 and presented a report which claimed that there was evidence of a large structure beneath the Babri Mosque. The report stated that the structure was consistent with a Hindu temple. Here is the list of some legal evidences presented in the court. Archaeological findings played a key role in the Ayodhya temple controversy as they provided evidence for the existence of a Hindu temple at the disputed site before the construction of the Babri Mosque. The Archaeological Survey of India, ASI, conducted an excavation at the disputed site between March and August 2003 and presented its findings in court. The ASI excavated 3 trenches at the disputed site and found evidence of a continuous cultural sequence from the early historic period to the medieval period. The ASI found the remains of a massive structure with distinctive features of a Hindu temple, such as pillar bases, doorjamb fragments, and architectural fragments. The ASI concluded that the structure dated back to the 11th–12th century CE and that it was a Hindu temple. The ASI also found evidence of a pre-existing structure at the disputed site, which it identified as a Hindu religious structure. The ASI concluded that the pre-existing structure was a massive platform, possibly a plinth of a temple, which was made of bricks, lime plaster, and decorated terracotta panels. The ASI found that the platform had a north-south orientation and was aligned with the major axis of the later mosque. The ASI also found animal bones and remnants of human activity, which it suggested were evidence of a ritual use of the site. The ASI's findings were controversial and were challenged by some scholars and historians who argued that they were not based on sound scientific principles. Critics of the ASI's findings argued that the ASI did not follow standard archaeological procedures, that its excavation was flawed, and that its conclusions were politically motivated. Despite the controversy, the ASI's findings were accepted by the Allahabad High Court, which ruled that there was sufficient evidence to prove the existence of a Hindu temple at the disputed site. The High Court relied heavily on the ASI's findings in its judgment and concluded that the disputed site was the birthplace of Lord Ram. The ASI's findings played a crucial role in the resolution of the Ayodhya temple controversy. They provided scientific evidence for the existence of a Hindu temple at the disputed site, which had been a subject of dispute for decades. The ASI's findings were widely accepted by the Hindu community and were seen as a vindication of their long-held belief that the disputed site was the birthplace of Lord Ram. However, the ASI's findings were also criticized by some scholars and historians who argued that they were not based on sound scientific principles and that they were politically motivated. Historical records. Many historical records were presented by both sides in the case, including maps, travelogues, and inscriptions. These records provided evidence of the existence of a temple at the disputed site before the mosque was built. In addition to the archaeological findings, historical records were also presented as evidence in the Ayodhya temple controversy. These records were in the form of old documents, texts, and inscriptions that showed the existence of a temple dedicated to Lord Ram at the disputed site in Ayodhya. One such document was a report submitted by the British colonial administrator, Montgomery Martin, in 1838. The report stated that Hindus considered the site to be the birthplace of Lord Ram and had been visiting it as a pilgrimage site for centuries. Martin also mentioned the existence of a temple at the site, which had been destroyed by Babur and replaced with a mosque. Another historical record presented in court was the account of the Jesuit priest Joseph Tiefenthaler, who visited Ayodhya in the 18th century. In his account, he described a large temple dedicated to Lord Ram at the site of the Babri Masjid. He also mentioned that Hindus believed the temple to be the birthplace of Lord Ram and that it was destroyed by the Mughals. Apart from these historical records, there were also inscriptions found at the site that suggested the presence of a temple dedicated to Lord Ram. These inscriptions dated back to the 12th century and mentioned the name of King Ramachandra of the Ayodhya dynasty. It was believed that the inscriptions were made during the construction of the temple. However, it is important to note that these historical records were not uncontested. Some scholars argued that they were not conclusive enough to prove the existence of a temple at the disputed site. They pointed out that many of these records were written centuries after the alleged existence of the temple and could have been subject to bias or manipulation. In conclusion, historical records were presented in court as evidence in the Ayodhya temple controversy. These records included old documents, texts, and inscriptions that suggested the existence of a temple dedicated to Lord Ram at the disputed site. While these records were not uncontested and could have been subject to bias or manipulation, they were still considered by some as crucial evidence in the case. Religious texts, such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, were also presented as evidence by the Hindu side. These texts are considered sacred by Hindus and provide descriptions of the birthplace of Lord Ram at the disputed site. These texts included ancient Hindu scriptures such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are considered to be sacred texts by Hindus. The Ramayana, in particular, played a significant role in the controversy as it is the epic that narrates the life story of Lord Ram, who is believed to be the incarnation of Lord Vishnu. The Ramayana describes Ayodhya as the birthplace of Lord Ram and mentions a grand temple that was built at the site where Lord Ram was born. In the Ramayana, Lord Ram is described as the king of Ayodhya and the rightful heir to the throne. However, he was exiled to the forest by his stepmother, Kaikeyi, who wanted her own son to become the king. During his exile, Lord Ram encountered many challenges and eventually defeated the demon king Ravana in a great battle. After his victory, he returned to Ayodhya and was welcomed by his people with great joy and celebration. The Mahabharata also mentions Ayodhya as the capital of the Ikshvaku dynasty, to which Lord Ram belonged. The Mahabharata is an epic that tells the story of the Great War between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and it is also considered to be a sacred text by Hindus. In addition to these religious texts, there were also several other texts that were presented as evidence in the Ayodhya temple controversy. These included historical accounts written by Muslim and British authors, as well as documents related to the land dispute between the parties involved in the case. However, it is important to note that the use of religious texts as evidence in a court of law is a controversial practice. Some legal scholars argue that religious texts are not objective sources of evidence and should not be used in legal proceedings. Others argue that in a case like the Ayodhya temple controversy, where the dispute is over a site that is considered sacred by Hindus, the use of religious texts as evidence is justified. In conclusion, religious texts were presented as evidence in the Ayodhya temple controversy. These texts included ancient Hindu scriptures such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which describe Ayodhya as the birthplace of Lord Ram and the site of a grand temple. While the use of religious texts as evidence in a court of law is controversial, they were considered by some as crucial evidence in the case. Eyewitness testimony. Witnesses were called by both sides to provide testimony regarding the history of the disputed site. Many witnesses testified that there was a temple at the site before the mosque was built. One of the key witnesses in the case was Ramchandra Das Paramans, the chief of the Ram Janmabhoomi Nyas. He was a Hindu ascetic who claimed to have been present at the Babri Masjid site in 1949 when the idols of Lord Ram were allegedly placed there. Paramans testified that the idols were placed inside the mosque with the permission of the then district magistrate of Faizabad. He also claimed that the mosque was built after demolishing a temple dedicated to Lord Ram. His testimony was used to support the claim of the Hindu parties that the mosque was built on the site of a pre-existing temple. Another key witness in the case was Muhammad Aslam alias Babur, a resident of Ayodhya. He testified that the mosque was in use by Muslims since his childhood and that he had never seen any idols or any evidence of a temple inside the mosque. His testimony was used to support the claim of the Muslim parties that the mosque was built on vacant land and had been in use by Muslims for centuries. There were several other eyewitnesses who testified in the case, including historians, archaeologists, and local residents. Their testimonies were used to support the claims of various parties in the dispute. However, it is important to note that eyewitness testimony can be unreliable and subject to bias, especially when the events in question occurred many years ago. Therefore, the court also relied on other types of evidence, such as archaeological findings and historical records, to arrive at its decision. In conclusion, eyewitness testimony played an important role in the Ayodhya temple controversy by providing first-hand accounts of the events that occurred in and around the disputed site. However, it is important to consider such testimony in conjunction with other types of evidence to arrive at a fair and just decision. Court records. In addition to the archaeological, historical, and religious evidence presented in court, there were also several court records and documents that were examined during the legal proceedings of the Ayodhya temple controversy. One of the most important court records in this case was the Faizabad District Court's judgment in 1886, which upheld the rights of the Hindu community to worship at the Ram Chabutra, a raised platform adjacent to the disputed site. The judgment stated that the Hindus had been worshipping at the site since time immemorial and that their rights to do so were protected by law. Another significant court record was the Allahabad High Court's judgment in 2010, which divided the disputed land into 3 equal parts among the Sunni Waqf board, the Nirmohi Akara, and the Hindu plaintiffs represented by the Hindu Mahasabha. The judgment was based on a careful examination of the evidence presented by all parties, including the archaeological findings and the historical records. Apart from these judgments, there were also several other court records and documents that were examined during the legal proceedings. These included land revenue records, maps, and surveys dating back to the British colonial era, as well as records of various court cases and disputes related to the site. However, it is important to note that the court records and documents were not the only factors considered in the legal proceedings. The evidence presented by the parties, including the eyewitness testimony and the opinions of experts, was also given due consideration by the courts. In the end, despite the complexity and controversy surrounding the Ayodhya temple dispute, the courts were able to arrive at a decision based on a careful examination of all the available evidence, both legal and otherwise. Overall, the Ayodhya temple controversy has had far-reaching implications for Indian society, politics, and culture. It has highlighted the need for greater understanding, dialogue, and tolerance between communities, as well as the need for stronger protections for religious freedom and cultural heritage. The issue has been the subject of numerous court cases and legal battles in India, with the Supreme Court of India finally issuing its landmark ruling in 2019, which awarded the site to the Hindu community and paved the way for the construction of a new temple dedicated to Lord Rama. The Ayodhya temple controversy is a complex and contentious issue that reflects the deep-seated religious and political tensions in India. While the Supreme Court ruling in 2019 was a step towards resolving the dispute, it remains to be seen whether it will be accepted by all parties involved. As India continues to grapple with issues of religious identity and tolerance, the Ayodhya temple controversy will remain an important topic of debate and discussion. Thanks for watching, hope you find it informative. For more such content, please like and subscribe to our channel.